Sorry I didn't do my usual cuckoo cuckoo on the comments, but I'm on my phone for this one, so that'll be why. I see Patrice is on there nice and early. Annie is on there too. Happy days. So today's lesson is all about not to let one emotion take control of you. So at the weekend, I took my girlies to see the movie Inside Out 2. And they'd seen it before, but that was their choice. They wanted to see the same thing again. You know what kids are like, they like to repeat. So I thought, great, I'll go along. Now, if you've seen those particular movies, it's one of the Disney Pixar. It's there's a bunch of characters and they all represent certain emotions. And the idea is those particular emotions are inside this little girl's head, or I think that's like the control center, and they kind of follow her through life. And then Inside Out 1, there was a bunch of emotions that were effectively taking charge. They had sadness, they had anger, they had joy. There was 5 of them, I forget what they all were, but regardless, there was a bunch of emotions in there. And in this one, it's interesting because it follows the story as the girl's then 12 or 13 and starting to go through puberty, and some other emotions make an appearance. Now, the reason we talk about it today was because I thought it was an interesting analogy or outlook on how certain emotions can overtake our mindset. And basically, in that again, these emotions are portrayed as individual characters who take control of the helm. And the new ones that pop up are anxiety. Okay, anxiety is like the key player in this new movie. Now, the interesting thing about all the emotions are each emotion thinks they're doing the best for the individual. So within yourself, you know, your emotions think that they're making you experience something so that it's good for you. You know, sadness is important to let emotions out. Anger can sometimes be to protect yourself. Anxiety is to protect yourself out of the potential of the future, kind of thing. So with this Inside Out 2, it was the emotion anxiety that was basically the main antagonist, inadvertently. And there was an interesting quote in it where they work out to say that no one emotion should have full control of the body. And I was thinking about it, I was like, that's so true. You shouldn't let one particular emotion rule everything. And the anxiety one was very interesting because we all, as adults, well, most of us experience some form of anxiety, and to other people, it can be very, very crippling. Now, at one point in the movie, again, no spoilers here, at one point in the movie, the character anxiety had recruited the imagination department or the creative department to help her with a particular task. And that's so true, isn't it? Because if you've got a very good imagination, you know, if you're very, very creative, which was a positive thing when you were maybe younger or applying it to the right things, if it gets recruited to work on a task that would involve anxiety, oh my goodness, you can get so creative with the negative outcomes that you're afraid of, which is ultimately what happens with anxiety, isn't it? Is that we imagine possible outcomes and then we allow those potential outcomes to affect us before they've even happened. It's like almost like predicting the future and trying to plan for it, but we still feel the punishment in the now because we act as if that future has already happened and we feel the negative emotion because of it. But I just thought it was very, very interesting when I was watching it, the way that they recruited the imagination department. And I was like, wow, now if you actually use that, if you've got a good imagination, next time you feel crippled by anxiety and all the potentials and possibles of what might happen, stop and think and just says, has your little imagination person that's taking control of the helm, if you like, recruited the imagination department, because they become a very powerful combo. And in the movie, again, no spoilers, the good emotions, if you like, or the more common ones, they then start to, they jump in, the way the setup that they had for the imagination department was like an office thing with individual cubicles. And each person in the imagination department was to scribble down a potential outcome. They got filtered in, and anxiety was like, this is great, this is a potential outcome where the girl embarrasses herself so she loses all her friends. If the girl does this, this happens. If the girl does that, she gets kicked out of school. So the imagination department had got recruited to think of all the possible negative outcomes, and they were filtering them through. And this poor wee girl in real time is experiencing all these negative things. So their head's going crazy. So when the positive characters come in, one of the main characters is known as Joy, right? She then tries to turn the tide, and it's interesting what happens because she jumps into one of the seats. She's hiding in the cubicle, so she starts writing very positive outcomes, right? She starts saying, no, 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 it's all going to be fine, and she's going to make lots of friends. And she filtered it into the printer, and it came up on the big screen. And the effect that it had on the little girl in real life was really interesting, because all of a sudden she smiled. She's like, oh, rather than your imagination feeding a negative potential outcome, the imagination was used to feed a positive outcome, and it was helping to diffuse anxiety. And as it played on, it was just quite fascinating. But the key to it is that, you know, all of our emotions are important for our well-being to experience in some shape or form, but it's about having balance. And if you feel like you're getting crippled by any one emotion, then you need to make sure the balance is restored. So if you haven't seen that movie, I would strongly recommend get it on when it comes out on Disney. Or if you're subscribed to Disney Plus, so go to the cinema or whatever. Try and catch that movie, because sometimes manifesting our emotions as individual characters and seeing how they interact within your head can help you process them. Because sometimes anxiety gets this negative spin on it. It's like, oh my goodness, anxiety is such a horrible thing. But I've said this before, the very process of anxiety is useful if it's pointed in the right direction. Because what is it when you experience anxiety? And I'm just focusing on this because of the movie. When you experience anxiety, it's fear of the future, right? But it's not just fear of the future, it's very fast processing of all the potential outcomes based on one particular action you're considering taking. Now, sometimes if that action is out of your control, it gets even worse. It spirals. So let's just say you bumped your car. You bumped your car into someone else, right? And they weren't around, and you tried to kind of whatever, and you left your number in their windscreen to say, look, here I am, you know, give me a call. I'm really sorry I bumped your car. And you come away from that because you had to get on with your day and there was nobody there and you didn't know how to contact them. You come away from that. And all of a sudden your thought processes can go very, very negative. It can be all like, oh my goodness, what if the wind blew it off? And then that person just phones the police, and then they use cameras, and the cameras find out I bumped their car, but the camera doesn't catch the fact they left a note, and then I get chased for X, Y, and Z. Or you're like, oh my goodness, what if somebody else takes it and uses my number and gives my financial details away, or whatever it may be. You know, your mind can go off on an absolute tangent negatively if not harnessed. But in a positive manner, when you actually use the process of anxiety, filtering out what the potential outcomes, it can be quite positive when put to good use. You know, people that are very good problem solvers can follow the thread of a potential outcome to make a decision on whether it's the right way to do it. So you might be, let's just keep it nice and simple, right? You might be planning out your garden and where you want to plant things. You might stand back and look at everything and say, right, I might put my carrots down here. But then you think, but the river's nearby, and if it was to flood, it would bowl that away and they wouldn't really make it. Oh, okay, right. Let's not do that. Let's put them higher up onto higher ground. Let's put the flowers here. If I put the flowers there, then in the summer they're going to attract more bees, which is closer to where I like to enjoy a drink or a beer in the summer in the sun. So maybe not put the flowers too close to here. My point is that the very same problem-solving process that your brain goes through that can follow threads to the nth degree is very similar to anxiety. The only difference is when anxiety kicks in, it's trying to protect you from those outcomes, right? So you're emotionally invested in the outcomes. And then by the same token, you can then be emotionally debilitated by the potential of the outcome, even though it's not happened yet, which is like, knocks you for six. So the whole point of this lesson was that in the movie, there was that quote that no one emotion should rule the entire body. So if you've ever gone through periods where you feel either really angry or really sad. Now, I know that with sadness, there's obviously depression, there's a chemical element of that. So let's not get too deep into it. Let's just keep it surface level for sake of it. If you're really angry, really sad, even if you're super happy for a while, you want to embrace a little bit of the sadness here and there, or anxious, or nervous, or paranoid, any one emotion that's ruled the roost for too long, remind yourself that one emotion should not rule you. And therefore, even if you visualize these little emotions in your head, give one of the other emotions a shot at the helm, just to take over for a while. I guess it's the basis of when, if you are going through an unhappy time, friends will take you out to experience a bit of fun. Guess what? You go out for a bit of fun, happy, joy, laughter are the people that take control of the helm for a period of time. And then you come back home again, you're like, oh, I'm unhappy again. You're like, yeah, but for a couple of hours there, you forgot about your problems because somebody else was at the helm. So it's just making sure that no one emotion rules the roost. And anytime that happens, manifesting these little people in your head like that without going too crazy with it can help you process it. Because remember that anxiety is not necessarily a bad person as such, a bad part of you. It is trying to protect you. It just goes into overload and then leaves you crippled. But the problem that we have often with anxiety is people are like, cure your anxiety. It's like, you're always going to experience some level of anxiety. Everybody will. Dogs do. I mean, it's International Dog Day. Dogs will feel it. They'll get a bit of anxiety if there's something they're not happy with or not controlled with. We'll all experience sadness, happy, joy, moments of depression, paranoia. There's all these different emotions that we'll always experience. But so long as there's a nice balance in your life that you don't feel crippled by one for too long. So if you haven't seen the movie, go and see it. It was definitely a kids' movie, but there was a lot of kind of stuff in there. And like I say, I loved it when the imagination department got on board, because they were like, oh, anxiety's recruited the imagination department. And you know yourself that anytime you've gone to town on a potential outcome, it's always worse the more creative your mind got with the outcomes. You think, oh my goodness, like, what am I doing? None of these outcomes have happened yet. There's a very high chance that none of them will happen. Just because they're a possibility doesn't mean it will happen, And it's like when you buy a lottery ticket, right? Now, when you buy a lottery ticket, there is a lot of outcomes that are more likely to happen than you getting every single number right. You sit and you pray you're going to get every number right. This is my time and this would be great. But the likelihood of that happening is very, very low, because if it did happen, you'd be a couple million richer in your back pocket and you'd be very, very happy about that, I'm sure. Or if you weren't happy about that, you wouldn't have bought the ticket in the first place. That's a very positive outcome. But the reverse is also true. You can dwell on one of the negative potentials of your anxiety-based situation. It's still very unlikely it's going to happen. Or if it was extremely likely it was going to happen, then a lot of the time you usually get to acceptance faster. Right? If you had been involved in some accident that you knew was your fault, and you thought that it was going to be a big court battle for whose insurance company was going to pay the damage, but you thought to yourself, it's more than likely going to have to be my insurance company covering it, because it was pretty much my fault, but they're fighting out anyway. You come to acceptance faster, because you're like, if it's likely. But a lot of the time with anxiety is that part of us know it's unlikely, but the outcome is still not desirable. So because it's unlikely and undesirable, we're very much, we worry about it, we panic about it, because we think, oh my God, that's so unlikely. And if it happened, it would really not be desirable. And I really don't want it to happen, so I'm going to just keep thinking about it. It's wasted energy. So never let one emotion control your whole body. Here we are. 13-minute waffle on Inside Out 2. Patrice is saying, I love the first Inside Out movie. Happy days. And Izzy's joined us. Thank you, Izzy. I mean, the thing is with Inside Out, they could easily make other movies. It's very cleverly done. I love how certain movies have the ability to lightly touch on subjects, and you can go as deep as you want with it. Like I was watching, my girls were watching it on superficial level. Well, I think they were anyway. But I was watching it just amazed with the whole imagination department, because I was thinking, yeah, because your imagination is a powerful tool, but when it's used for the wrong thing, which happens with what we're talking about with anxiety, it can become very, very bad. It's like the whole Spider-Man quote, with great power comes great responsibility. If you've got a very good imagination, that's great if it's used for good. If it's used for evil, not so great. Annie says, I've been learning to live with anxiety for years now, and talking to myself as if I would reassure my son, coupled with deep breathing, helps a lot. Yeah, that's quite a nice thing, Annie, especially as a mother, because you want to, it's that whole thing, isn't it? It's about sometimes to help ourselves, we sometimes have to ask the question, what would you say to a loved one if they were going through the same situation? A lot of people are like, well, I would tell them to do this, and I would tell them to do that, and I would tell them to stay positive, and it's unlikely in X, Y, Z. And then you're like, right, well, that same advice, tell it to yourself. Sometimes talking about yourself in the third person helps. You can almost put yourself in that situation, similar to what you've done there, Annie, is, you could say, I'll use myself examples. So Coach Rab, how would you help Rab get through the anxious situation of, when I got locked out of my Facebook a couple of weeks ago, right? So that you can almost just be like, right, okay, what advice would I give someone else? If Coach Rab was out of my body and was someone else right now, what advice would I give? Well, the kind of advice I would say, calmly, because I'm not emotionally attached to it, it's become a third person thing. I would say, well, Coach Rab, focus on what you can do, email who you need to email, contact who you need to, all this kind of stuff. Keep yourself busy in the short term. Try not to think about it too much and try and just follow on all the instructions until it's resolved. And over time, it will get to bed earlier, sleep, prioritize good health, and it will make the process go quicker. Stress management techniques, that kind of stuff. That's the kind of advice I would give to someone else. And if you then make that someone else your third person, you in the third person, you can actually map out really constructive advice for whatever it is you're dealing with. But you almost have to step out yourself and then do a bit of self-coaching. Amanda says, I work things through in my head to deal with anxiety. One of the ways to do it, yeah. Yeah, anxiety is a tough one. I mean, we've touched on that because of the movie. One thing I will say with anxiety is be mindful of who you chat to about it, because people that care about you can actually make it worse. And what I mean by that is that if you spoke to someone who genuinely cares about you, and this is not their fault, by the way, you can sometimes trigger their anxiety about it. So if you said to them, today I'm trying to think of a situation that your friend would get quite mad at you for. I know. Today I had to get something set up, and I gave away my bank details to this company to set something up, right? But I'm worried it's a scam. Then all of a sudden your friend might be then worrying for you, and then they get you worked up, and they're like, oh, as much as they can give you solid advice, they can sometimes insert their own emotions into it. And it's because they care and they don't realize they're doing it. They're like, oh my God, you didn't, did you? You better do this, and you better do that, and cancel your cards and lock down this. Now, it's not that their advice isn't sound. I want to be clear on that. But it's how their advice makes you feel, right? So sometimes people, if you ever come across somebody that can give you great advice without instigating a riot in your head at the same time, someone that can very calmly just say, okay, you might want to think about cancelling cards on the safe side. You might want to think about this rather than, because the people that inject their own emotions in, because of mirror neurons, you pick up on their anxiety. You makes you worse and they worse, and all of a sudden there's an urgency, and all of a sudden everything's panicky. And then when you're panicky, you don't think straight. So when you are ever talking to anybody about a situation that's made you anxious, make sure that who you speak to or the best people to speak to are the ones that can remain calm, listen, because their calming presence, regardless of what it's about, will help soothe you too. If they're somebody that, to no fault of their own, they're doing it because they care, they also get amped up by it, it will make you worse. So you always have to be mindful of, if you deal with anxiety on your own with your own techniques, great. When you do speak to people, which does help as well, sometimes, problem shared is a problem halved. But making sure that who you share it with is the right person for that problem. And we all have certain people that we go to for problems. If you had an education-based problem, you might go to a former teacher or lecturer, and they might be very more analytical towards that. If you had a money problem, you might have somebody that's gone through similar money problems. They can stay calm and say, oh, this is what I did, that kind of stuff. So you'll usually have different people for different problems. So if you do want to ever share your anxiety, make sure you choose your people carefully, because you want the advice to be calming but solid. You don't want the advice to instigate a riot in your head. Now, whilst what they're saying is probably very good advice. It's the way that it's said, and that's often comes down to that person, because we're all caring people naturally deep down. We all want the best for the people we genuinely love and like. And when you hear something, you naturally get into a panic for them. You're like, oh my God, that doesn't sound good. And that own person's hemp up doesn't help the situation. And then they just create this whole level of panic that ultimately they can walk away from because it's not directly their problem. But then you're just find yourself in this bubble of like, oh my goodness. So that's a long waffly saying of being mindful of who you do chat to about it. Pick the right people. Patrice saying, I need quiet time and outdoor time when I'm ultra anxious. It helps me calm down and then be able to think about things rationally. That's really, really good, Patrice. It's actually just come to me, actually. Some of the most common anxiety-based attacks are usually work or work-specific. And it's sometimes because change. Companies get bought over or regulations change or hours change. Usually it's when something changes, because when something remains a constant, whatever it may be, you get used to it, you understand it, you expect it. You know what's coming. The world is, I'm not saying that doesn't make your work stressful. Of course it's stressful. We all find different work things stressful at different periods in our life, 100%. But I tell you what really increases the stress levels and anxiety is change. Because when something's changing, often you don't know what to expect. And that's when you're like, oh, and that's when the mind starts going 100 miles an hour. And in our lives, usually the worst anxiety situations are the ones that are out of our control. So things that are changing whether you like it or not, like a workplace setup, whether that's a new boss coming in or or an overhaul of what's happening, or sometimes even just the anxious waiting to see if you're still going to have a job. Are they making cuts? Are they being more strict about what's happening? All that kind of stuff. So change usually brings in, and having things like what you were doing, Patrice, there, get yourself out for a walk and calm down, helps you think rationally. Remember as well that fundamentally, anxiety is an emotion. Get fired up on the emotional side of the brain. And in order for you to calm down and think rationally or logically, you almost need to fire up that side of the brain. Now, getting out into fresh air is good, distraction, okay? Crossing the midline with a ball, okay? Just literally throwing a ball hand to hand helps as well. The breathing technique that Annie mentioned earlier, you can do 4-4-8 breathing. There's lots of different breathing techniques. Very, very good for helping you calm. The reason the breathing techniques are good as well, it's not just the change in oxygen that helps you calm, it's the fact you're focusing on the count, whatever your method is. Like one of the ones I promote, which is an old asthmatic one, which is 4-4-8. So you're breathing in for 4, holding for 4, out for 8. So because you're counting on the numbers, all of a sudden you're counting. When you're counting, your logical side of the brain is going, right, okay, and it's focusing on the numbers. That also helps take over, because when you're emotionally charged, this thing is just like firing on all cylinders and it's really, really tough. But if you can start to get the logical and rational side of the brain going again, that usually helps too. For me personally, and again, everyone's different, I always calm down when I've helped someone. So whenever I've gone through troublesome times, I always try and help someone go on somehow. Because generally, if I've made somebody else's problem my own, it means for a period of time I've not thought about whatever the pickle was bothering me. Then when you work through and help people with advice, you then feel good that you've helped them, they feel better, their sense of relief kind of transports across to you. Then afterwards you're like, oh, I feel good about myself. And you're like, right. And my own problem I hadn't thought about for a while, and all of a sudden you come back with a calmer head. So that's one of the approaches that I do. Again, it's different. Everybody's different, and that's the key thing, isn't it? Is that you've got to find what works for you. And you, over the periods in your life, there will be certain things that you know are really good for you. Like I know if I go next to water, I recharge. There are other people that like to get out for a walk in the wind, okay? There's other people like to be next to fire. It's very elemental for some, or read a book, or some people like to just hash it out in a workout and really sweat it out, whatever it may be. But find what works for you. And he says, for other emotions, I'm usually just walking, jogging, or kicking the heck out of a boxing bag. Helps a lot to get out of me, and then I calm down and analyse what's going on. So Annie, that's a really good one. So that falls into what I was saying with working out. Now remember, was it last Wednesday's nutrition lesson was all about endorphins. This Wednesday is going to be about electrolytes, by the way, just for everybody. But last week's was all about endorphins. And what you need to remember is endorphins, fundamentally, one of the happy hormones, but they are a pain reliever. And this is why, if you've got a problem that's going on or something that's causing you anxiety, getting a workout in is quite good for you, because once you stimulate that pain relief, you feel so much better. You wear yourself out with a workout, which is always good. The reason it's good to wear yourself out with a workout is that if your creative side of the brain is firing along with the emotional side of the brain, and you've got lots of energy to feed that process, yeah, that thing's going to go for quite some time. If you wear your body out physically with some exercise and get a bit of pain relief through the endorphins, guess what? All of a sudden, there's not so much energy going to that. It calms down. The endorphins gives you a bit of pain relief, and it allows you to just like, whew. It's, you know, when people talk about when they get really stressed, they then have a drink. Well, what they do with alcohol is pain relief. Most drug addictions are based on pain relief in some shape or form, right? Escapism. Now, workouts increase endorphins. Pain relief. It's a healthier way of doing it, let's be fair. But, you know, depending on the problem, you might think to yourself, yep, I'm going to get this workout done. Now, remember that sometimes when you've got a problem, working out's the last thing on your mind. You just say, oh, no, I can't. I've just got to think about this problem. But sometimes you need to take a step back and be like, the problem's not going to change in 45 minutes. But if you went and hit a punch bag or did some squats and push-ups or swung a kettlebell or went for a run, you're going to burn off some energy, you're going to calm down, get the oxygen flowing, get the endorphins going. Your problem's still going to be the problem when you come back to it at the end 45 minutes later. It's not going to have changed in that time. So that might be worth exploring at least once. Change, definitely lots of changes at work right now are making me feel unsettled. Yep. Change, Patrice. More often not, change is what causes it. And change all across the world, not just in work scenarios. You think about neighbours. I've noticed over the years, whenever I've moved or I've lived in a place, and there's an old lady that used to live on the other side of me, and the house next to me at that time was lying empty for goodness knows how long. And then that house next to me got done up and somebody was moving in. And the old dear on the other side was really anxious. I mean, that's all she talked about. And I understood it, because to her, she was really anxious about who was going to be moving in 15, 20 feet from where she lived. Change. Now, as it turns out, it was a lovely couple that moved in that you never really saw. But she didn't know that. And she spent a lot of time getting stressed. So it fundamentally comes down to change. But one thing is about change is constant, right? There will be a change, and then that becomes the norm. And you then just have to, it's like the line that they do with the wizards all the time it's based on thou shall not pass, but this too shall pass. You know, it's that whole, this too shall pass. Breathing helps me. Stress can reduce my asthma. Breathing helps stop that when I feel come on. Yep, great one, Patrice. Man says, I used to run out my anger when I was a teenager if I ever got upset, then came back and dealt with it. Yep, running out of anger is a good one. Why getting out for a walk and then just doing any sort of exercise on that walk can help. But like I say, if you check out the movie, what it does is it explores that these emotions have little characters inside your head. And as I said before, the key thing for me that I took away from the movie were two things. One is that no one emotion should be allowed to control your entire body. So if you've ever gone through periods of time where you have felt a particular way constantly, that person's had the helm for too long, that particular character, and they need to give the stick or the wheel or the whatever away to someone else. The other thing was, which the takeaway I had from the movie, was just how dangerous it was when the imagination department got in cahoots with any emotion. But ultimately, when anxiety got in with the imagination department, all of a sudden you thought, yeah, that's not a great combination. But it was interesting because, again, in the same movie, when the sort of main character, Joy, repurposed the imagination department for a positive outcome. So again, when you've got a good imagination, or any imagination, when you use it for positive things, you can have a positive outcome. If it's used for negative things, it has a negative outcome. So it all just depends on your perception. What's that whole thing? It's what is chaos for the fly is bliss for the spider, or something. For what is chaos for the fly in the web is bliss for the spider, or what's that? It's all about perception, isn't it? There we go. All right, any questions at all before I leave you to your Monday? As I said, Wednesday session, based on last Wednesday, we briefly talked on, well, somebody mentioned electrolytes, and I said, well, if it's a if it's a question that people want to talk about, then we'll roll with it. A few people said, yep, love to hear about electrolytes. So this Wednesday's coaching session will be all about electrolytes. Now remember, if you have any ideas for future lessons, particularly for the Wednesdays, drop them in on the live. Just say, hey Rab, what about this or what about that? Because the issue that I have is that I know what I know, but I can't remember what you know or what you know recently or what you'd benefit from hearing from. So letting me know. I love waffling about nutrition, geeking out and all that kind of good stuff. So, but again, although we'll be talking electrolytes on Wednesday, and if there's ever another lesson that comes to you between then and now and then, you can help me out because I love it when I get a bit of direction. If somebody says, Rab, I'd like to talk about this, great. I will talk about that. All I need is one or two yeses so that I know there's at least a small demand for it, and then we can stretch out a lesson. And of course, you can always ask questions when you're on about anything. You're not stuck to that one subject, but it's just to have the subject at the start so we can go a bit deeper with it. All right. Okay, everybody. Thank you so much. Repurchase the Mind's Imagination Department. I love that. I'm looking forward to lecture lessons. Happy days. Right, everybody. Have an awesome week ahead. See you on Wednesday, as always. There'll be electrolytes on that one. And if you make that, thank you so much for everybody who made this live. And for everybody that watches it after the fact, thank you as well. I have been keeping an eye on the views as well. So I'm keeping an eye on who's watching these. So here we go. Thank you, everybody. Have a great day. Bye-bye.